Picture a Soviet official sitting at a heavy wooden desk.
Oh, that's a bleak image right off the bat.
Yeah, I know, but stick with me. So, they bring a loud, decisive rubber stamp down on a document, and that single motion will ultimately determine whether a family gets an apartment or faces exile.
Right, absolute power.
Exactly. Now, shift the image. Picture a corporate executive grinning in a tailored suit, ringing the opening bell at a stock exchange. A crowd is cheering, and millions of dollars are changing hands in milliseconds.
Okay, very different vibe.
Completely. And finally, picture yourself sitting on your couch tonight, scrolling through an algorithmically curated feed that dictates exactly what information, what outrage, and basically what products you see today.
It's funny because those feel like, three entirely disconnected moments in time.
They really do. But underneath the aesthetics, the wood desk, the digital bell, the glowing screen, they share the exact same psychological architecture as an ancient high priest offering a sacrifice at a stone altar.
Which is just a wild concept to wrap your head around.
It is. And welcome to today's deep dive, where we are peeling back the invisible scaffolding of the world you live in. We've got a really fascinating stack of sources to guide us today, pulling from historical and sociological research dossiers on secular hierarchies across history.
Yeah, plus some pretty profound psychological frameworks.
Right. And to tie it all together, we're going to use the sci-fi fantasy novel San Vitae, The Awakening, as our anchor. Our mission today is to explore an incredibly uncomfortable paradox. Basically, even when societies abandon their gods, they do not abandon the temple. They just, they remodel it.
Yeah, because we operate under this grand assumption of human progress. We tell ourselves that as society secularizes, we trade myth for reason.
Like we're maturing as a species or something.
Exactly. We think we leave behind the dogmas, the castes, and the rigid moral hierarchies of the medieval world, and we just replace them with pure, rational logic. But the historical research paints a very different picture.
The human need for an absolute authority doesn't just vanish, does it?
Not at all. The need for something to dictate our place in the world doesn't go away just because we stop going to church. The architecture of belief simply changes its skin.
Right. And to see the blueprint of that architecture, we actually have to rewind to the very first time humanity tried to replace divine mandate with, well, a filing cabinet.
The birth of the bureaucratic empire.
Which sounds so dry, but it's actually mind-blowing.
It is. Because if you look at ancient Han China or the early formations of modern European nation-states, you witness a revolutionary shift in how power is justified.
Before this, order was maintained through divine right, yeah.
Right. A king ruled because the gods willed it. But early bureaucracies engineered a new kind of order, one built entirely on paper, procedure, and standardization.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because a king claiming he speaks for the sun god is terrifying. But a guy holding a stack of forms just seems, I don't know, boring. How does paperwork replace divine authority?
By creating immortality. Charismatic leaders die. Armies can be defeated, but procedures create an invisible, unending system where the individual human matters far less than the role they fill.
Oh, wow. So the system outlives everyone.
Exactly. These early bureaucracies established rigid administrative ranks and highly standardized rituals. Think about a wax seal, a signature line, or even a specific way a document must be folded.
So the bureaucrats effectively became a secular clergy.
Yes, their sole function was to interpret the complex rules, mediate your relationship with the ultimate power, which is the state, and control your access to resources based on whether you perform the rituals correctly.
You know, that casts a completely different light on my last trip to the DMV.
I bet it does.
The waiting room feels so soul-crushing because it's fundamentally an exercise in submission, isn't it?
It is entirely an exercise in submission. The bureaucracy asserts its dominance by forcing you to conform to its timeline and its specific, often confusing rituals.
Let's take the analogy further because the sources touch on how we interact with the modern tax system. And this was fascinating.
Oh, the tax analogy is perfect.
Right. Think about how we treat filling out tax forms. We approach it with the exact same reverence, anxiety, and fear of punishment as a religious confession.
You literally have to confess your financial history to an invisible, all-powerful entity.
Yes, the IRS or the government. And because the language of this higher power is so complex, you hire a CPA to act as your priest.
They intercede on your behalf.
Exactly, hoping you filled out the incantation correctly so you aren't hit with the modern equivalent of divine wrath, an audit.
The psychological parallel is really striking there. The ledger has essentially replaced the moral scale. But here is the friction point in human history. A bureaucracy manages resources brilliantly, but it is cold.
It lacks that emotional pull.
Right. Paperwork tells you how to organize society, but it completely fails to tell humans why they should care. We are existential creatures. We crave a grand narrative.
Because a tax form doesn't inspire a population to march in the streets or sacrifice their lives for the greater good.
Exactly. So we needed to engineer the spiritual fervor of religion without the supernatural elements, which kind of catapults us into the massive ideological experiments of the 20th century.
Yeah, the research dossier examines how both ends of the political and economic spectrum attempted to solve this grand narrative problem. Let's look at the Soviet model first, based on what the sources say. They explicitly tried to eradicate religion, tearing down churches and exiling religious leaders.
They dismantled the old religion, sure, but they immediately erected a secular theology in its place. The writings of Marx and Lenin were elevated from political theory to sacred, unquestionable scripture.
And the leaders basically became prophets.
Treated with the exact same reverence, yes. And the rituals didn't disappear, they were just repurposed. Instead of religious feast days, you had massive military parades and ritualized collective labor.
The punishment mechanisms are what stand out to me in the sources. They didn't judge you for sin anymore. They judged you for ideological correctness.
And that is the absolute hallmark of a sacred hierarchy. They enforced strict moral purity codes. If you deviated from the party line, you weren't just making a political error, you were a heretic.
You were threatening the sacred order of the revolution.
Which, in their framework, justified brutal punishment. The political party became the infallible priesthood. Reason and state doctrine became the new god.
I mean, I can easily look at an authoritarian regime and spot the dogma. It's overt. But our sources turn the lens onto capitalist class systems as well. And I have to admit, I struggled initially to see Wall Street as a religion.
It's definitely less obvious on the surface.
Right, because religion requires faith in the unseen. Markets are just math, you know? Supply and demand, quarterly earnings reports. Where is the God in a spreadsheet?
Well, the sources suggest you find the God in the way the system is talked about, and more importantly, how it assigns human value. In this framework, the market functions as a divine, omniscient force.
Like the phrase, the invisible hand.
Exactly. We treat the market as an all-powerful entity that is fundamentally beyond questioning. When a massive market crash wipes out millions of jobs, we talk about it like a hurricane or an earthquake.
Like an act of God that we simply have to endure.
Right, rather than a system engineered by human choices.
That's a really fair point from the dossier. We do treat economic forces as forces of nature. But how does that translate to the individual?
Through the myth of meritocracy. This is where capitalism operates as a moral theology. It provides a narrative that wealth equates to virtue.
So the invisible hand rewards the chosen.
Yes. Those who succeed are deemed inherently smarter, harder working, or more valuable to society. And conversely, it punishes the unworthy.
So if you are at the bottom of the hierarchy, the system implicitly suggests you deserve to be there because of a personal failing.
It is a theology of winners and losers, which neatly justifies massive inequality without anyone having to feel guilty about it.
Let me bring in some of the neurological research from the dossier here because it blew my mind. A Wall Street trading floor with people screaming at screens actually is psychologically identical to a religious congregation.
The dopamine response is incredible.
It is. The dopamine hits a trader experiences from a massive financial win, activate the exact same reward circuitry in the brain that deeply devoted individuals experience during a powerful religious ritual, the feeling of being aligned with a higher power.
The neurobiology really reveals the truth here. The human brain doesn't care if the higher power is a deity, the state, or the market. It simply craves the safety of a structured reality.
We have a profound evolutionary terror of chaos, don't we?
We do, and secular hierarchies provide an antidote to that chaos. They give us an ideology to explain the unpredictable world, rituals like corporate performance reviews or school pledges to give us an illusion of control, and symbols like corporate logos or national flags to grant us a tribal identity.
Which triggers a fascinating philosophical debate in our research about whether a society can ever be truly secular. The texts essentially offer three camps.
Right. Let's break those down.
The first is the optimistic view, which is that secularism is real, reason is slowly replacing faith, and we are maturing as a species.
The second camp argues that true secularism is biologically and sociologically impossible. Because of how our brains organize reality, we will invariably create sacred order.
Meaning our secular institutions are destined to become temples.
And our philosophies are destined to become dogmas. We simply cannot tolerate a universe without a master.
Then there's the third argument, which honestly feels the most unsettling, the idea that secularism is just a mask.
Right, the power structures persist, the hierarchies adapt just to survive, and the sacred merely becomes symbolic to hide the fact that humans are dominating other humans.
So the names of the ranks change, but the shape of the pyramid stays exactly the same. There is a quote from the dossier that perfectly captures the danger of that third argument. It says, "When a system explains the world, demands obedience, and punishes heresy, it becomes a religion in all but name."
That's a powerful way to put it.
The terrifying part of a secular religion is that it weaponizes rationality. We can do horrific, cruel things in the name of efficiency or progress. Because an action is framed as rational or economically necessary, we disable our moral alarms.
And this brings us to the most crucial mechanism of modern control, which the sources highlight through Michel Foucault's concept of the panopticon.
Oh, this part is brilliant.
To understand how these hierarchies maintain power without constantly using violence, you really have to understand the architectural design of the panopticon.
You're talking about the 18th century prison design by Jeremy Bentham, right?
Yeah.
Break down how that physical building translates into psychological control.
Okay, imagine a circular prison. The inmates' cells are arranged in a ring, all facing inward.
I'm picturing it.
In the very center of the ring is a guard tower. Now, the genius and the horror of the design is the lighting. The guard in the central tower is backlit, completely obscured by shadows.
So the inmates can see the tower, but they can never see if the guard is actually looking at them at any given moment.
Exactly. And because they can never know if they're being watched, they have to assume they are always being watched.
So they begin to police their own behavior.
Precisely. Foucault used this physical prison as the ultimate metaphor for modern society. The most efficient secular hierarchy doesn't need to force you to obey. It structures the environment so that you internalize the rules. You become your own jailer.
The ideology becomes the prison.
Yes.
Think about the modern workplace for a second. The green active dot on your Slack or Teams profile. You don't know if your manager is actually checking your status, but the possibility that they could be ensures you stay at your desk wiggling your mouse.
You have internalized the metric. The panopticon is literally in your living room.
We are so deeply embedded in our own systems of merit, markets, and digital surveillance that they don't look like constructed hierarchies to us. They just look like reality.
It's the old cliche of the fish not knowing what water is.
Which is exactly why fiction is such a vital tool for analysis. We can step out of our own water and look at a fabricated world to see the mechanisms clearly. The sci-fi universe of San Vitae. The Awakening acts as a perfect, horrifying mirror for this entire discussion.
The world building in San Vitae is just a masterclass in secular absolutism. The ruling class, the Santaries, sit at the top of a brutal hierarchy, but they never claim that a deity came down from the heavens and handed them a crown.
They justify their dominance purely through rational, biological, and historical superiority. They control a mysterious power called vitae, and they have elevated their study and mastery of it to a sacred status.
If you dissect the Santory system, you realize the author has synthesized the most effective tools of control from every real-world historical structure we've discussed today.
It's all in there.
It really is. They utilize Soviet-style ideological control, enforcing extreme purity tests on their members and punishing any deviation from their doctrine as treason.
But they pair that with capitalist-style class stratification. They treat the underclass, known as the humanes, as fundamentally less valuable.
And it's not framed as cruelty. It's framed as a biological and economic necessity because the humanes lack this vitae currency.
Finally, they wrap all of this in imperial bureaucratic rigidity. The Santori don't govern through passionate speeches. They govern through councils, highly ritualized performance metrics, and an meticulously engineered administrative structure.
They justify their dominance entirely through this self-perpetuating engineered logic. It is the ultimate myth of meritocracy, weaponized against a population.
The sources dig into the psychological toll this takes on the humanes underclass. It induces a state of learned helplessness. Can you explain the mechanics of how a population gets pushed into that state?
Yeah, learned helplessness was first observed in behavioral psychology experiments. If a subject, human or animal, is repeatedly subjected to a negative stimulus, like an electric shock, that they cannot escape or predict, something fundamental shifts in the brain.
They just give up.
The subject eventually learns that their actions have no correlation to the outcomes. Even when an opportunity to escape is finally presented, they won't take it. The brain has literally rewired itself to accept passivity as a survival mechanism.
So because the Santori frame their oppression not as the whims of an evil king, but as a natural, rational, necessary order, the violence they inflict is normalized.
Right. The humanities don't fight back because they believe fighting the way things are is as futile as fighting gravity.
That passivity is the ultimate triumph of the panopticon. But the entire narrative of San Vitae hinges on that passivity being shattered by the protagonist, Kurian.
Corian's a conscript,
Yeah.
someone forced into servitude at the bottom of this crushing pyramid.
And his journey isn't just about learning to fight physically, is it? It is a profound philosophical awakening. He realizes the guard tower is empty. Or, well, at least the guards aren't gods.
Right. Curian discovers that the Santori's infallible system is just a human invention. It's rules made up by flawed, power-hungry people trying to protect their gatekeeping mechanisms.
This realization forces Kurian into an existential crisis. To realize that your oppression is merely engineered rather than divinely ordained is a terrifying kind of liberation.
It is.
I want to linger on that terror for a second. If you genuinely believe the cosmos put you at the bottom of the pyramid, fighting it is a sin. You are fighting the universe. But if a human built the machine, a human can break the machine. Why is that terrifying?
Because it places the entire burden of responsibility squarely on your shoulders. The sources bring up the philosophy of existentialism here. Existentialists argue that freedom is not just the absence of physical chains. Freedom is the burden of self-authorship. By rejecting the identity and the hierarchy the Santori imposed on him, Kurian has to confront the terrifying reality that there is no cosmic order coming to save him.
Freedom begins where excuses end. That line from the dossier really punches you in the gut when you apply it to Kurian. He can no longer say, well, this is just my lot in life.
He becomes sovereign over himself, which means he has to define his own values. He has to stand alone in a world built on conformity.
It is far more exhausting to author your own identity than it is to simply follow the rules of a system, even an oppressive one.
Exactly. Kurian's rebellion isn't just a war against the Santori. It's a neurological liberation from the learned helplessness that kept him paralyzed. He refuses to participate in the illusion that their power is legitimate.
We have mapped out some vast territory today. I mean, we started by watching ancient empires swap out priests for paperwork, realizing that a bureaucracy can control resources, but it leaves humanity starving for a grand narrative.
And we saw how the 20th century attempted to fill that void, engineering modern economic and political systems to function as secular theologies. Both communism and capitalism deployed sacred texts, purity codes, and invisible divine forces to feed our deep psychological craving for meaning, protecting us from the anxiety of chaos.
And by peering into the fictional panopticon of San Vitae, we saw undeniable proof that oppression doesn't require the supernatural. It just requires a system that demands obedience, punishes heresy, and convinces you that its rules are the laws of nature.
The core truth, whether we are examining the Han Dynasty, a Wall Street trading floor, or a sci-fi ruling class, remains the same. Humans will always build temples.
The challenge for the individual, then, is awareness. If all hierarchies, even the modern ones wrapped in the language of reason, free markets, or efficiency, are just human-made adaptations designed to create order, what happens to your sense of self when you realize your specific secular god is entirely optional?
Take a hard look at the systems dictating your daily life. The pursuit of the corporate ladder, the strict adherence to a political tribe, the endless quest for validation from a social media algorithm.
If you realize that none of this architecture is sacred, that none of it is fundamentally real, what kind of world could you build instead?
You have to decide if you're going to keep polishing the floors of a temple someone else built or if you're going to walk out the front door.
A question to carry with you the next time you see a document getting stamped, hear a bell ring on a trading floor, or feel the urge to keep scrolling that feed. Ask yourself who built the temple you are standing in. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the invisible architecture around you.